The First X-File, and Prequel Audiostory.
The fire was thin, just paper and bone, a photograph of a wound unknown. Montana wind through the broken pines. The first X-File, 1973. He drove all night through the reservation dark, a single light in the tribal park. The doors unlocked, the blood was cold. The story that never could be told. Oh, the hills have eyes that glow red, and the things that walk when the moon is dead. You can lock your door, you can pray all night, but the dark has teeth and it won't survive. The first X-File still open. The first X-File unspoken. The coroner's hands were stained and old. These ribs were pulled, not broke, he told. The bite marks wide, the hair not right, something that haunts in the dead of night. The doctor smiled with eyes of red. I gave them life, he softly said, but life demands a bloody feed. Then he walked through the wall and left me be. Oh, the hills have eyes that glow red, and the things that walk when the moon is dead. You can lock your door, you can pray all night, but the dark has teeth and it won't survive. The first X-File still open. The first X-File unspoken. The case was never closed. It just grew more files, more agents, more secrets buried in the basement. But the first one was different, because Arthur Dales saw it, and it saw him. And somewhere out there in the hills north of Browning, it's still hungry.
Prologue, The Director's Office, J. Edgar Hoover Building, Washington, D.C., October 15, 1973. Special Agent Arthur Dales had been with the Bureau for 18 years. He had seen files so thick they needed their own boxes. He had seen files so thin they were barely worth the paper they were printed on. This one was different. Take a seat, Dales. Assistant Director Harold Kirsch was not a man who made small talk. He made decisions, and he expected other men to follow them. The Bureau has been receiving reports from Browning, Montana, disappearances, unusual animal attacks. The locals are calling them werewolf killings. Dales raised an eyebrow. Werewolves. I said that's what the locals are calling them. Kirsch's voice was flat. What they actually are is a problem. The Montana State Police have requested our assistance. I'm assigning you. Why me? Because you're the only agent I have who's ever handled anything like this before. Dales thought of Point Pleasant, 1952. The Mothman. He had been a junior agent then. The creature had been tall, gray, with wings that could carry it across the night sky and eyes that glowed red. People had seen it, and then nothing. The case had been filed under M in the Bureau's growing collection of unsolved, unexplainable cases. There was nothing to those reports, Dales said. There was enough to file them under X, Kirsch replied. And now there's enough to send you to Montana. Dales opened the file. The first page was a photograph of a body. The wounds were not consistent with any known animal attack. The flesh had been torn, not bitten. The bones had been broken, not crushed. The coroner had noted that the injuries were consistent with something that had hands, not claws. Get it done, Dales, Kirsch said, and try not to let any reporters get wind of this. The last thing we need is another Mothman. Dales stood. He tucked the file under his arm and walked to the door. He paused with his hand on the knob. Sir, what are the X-Files? Kirsch was silent for a long moment. Then he said, the X-Files are cases that don't fit anywhere else. They're the things we can't explain, the things we can't solve, the things we can't admit exist. Hoover started the first one back in '46. What was it? A series of murders in the Northwest. The victims were found in their homes, torn apart as if by a wild animal. The police cornered the killer in a cabin in Glacier National Park. They shot it. When they went inside, all they found was the body of a man named Richard Watkins. The murder stopped. Then, 8 years later, they started again. Kirsch's eyes met Dales's. The X-Files are where we put the things that don't make sense, and right now, you're the agent who gets to make sense of them. Dales opened the door and walked out. He did not look back. Part 1, The Arrival. Browning, Montana, October 17, 1973. The drive from Helena to Browning took 4 hours. Dales spent most of it thinking about the file. The first victim had been Martha White, a single mother. Her neighbors heard screaming around midnight. When the police arrived, they found the door unlocked, the lights on, and her body on the living room floor. The wounds were the problem. According to the coroner's report, the victim had been killed by something that had hands, fingers, thumbs. The injuries were not the result of an animal attack. They were the result of something that had grabbed her, held her, torn her apart piece by piece. There were no signs of forced entry. The victim had let her killer inside. Browning was a small town on the Blackfeet Indian Reservation. The population was just over 1,000. The streets were quiet, the buildings old, and the wind blew constantly from the east, carrying the smell of pine and snow. Dales pulled into the parking lot of the tribal police department. The flag was at half-mast. Inside, Chief Running Bear was waiting for him. Tall, broad-shouldered, with gray hair and a face that had seen too much. His eyes were dark, and they held Dales's gaze with an intensity that was almost uncomfortable. Agent Dales. Chief Running Bear. They shook hands. The chief's grip was firm. "Thank you for coming," Running Bear said. "I know this isn't the kind of case the FBI usually handles." "The Bureau takes all cases seriously, Chief." Running Bear snorted. "Do they? Then why did it take them 3 weeks to send someone?" Dales did not answer. He had no answer. Part 2, The Crime Scene, 1973 Forensics. Joseph Little Bear's residence, October 18, 1973. The second body had been found 4 days ago. Dales followed Running Bear's patrol car along a winding gravel road into the hills. The pines were so dense they blocked out the sky. The air was cold and damp. The house was a small, single-story structure at the end of a long driveway. Yellow crime scene tape flapped in the wind. The victim's name was Joseph Little Bear, Running Bear said. 34 years old, lived alone, worked at the casino. Any connection to the first victim? None. Dales stopped at the front door. The wood was splintered, but the lock was intact. Was the door forced? No, unlocked, just like the first one. Dales stepped inside. The smell hit him first. Copper and salt and something sweet like flowers left too long in stagnant water. On the floor, a dark stain spread from the center of the room to the far wall. Where's the body? Helena, the coroner wanted a more thorough examination. Dales knelt beside the stain. He ran his fingers over the floorboards. They were rough, untreated, and they had absorbed the blood like a sponge. An hour later, a young man in a wrinkled suit walked through the door. He carried a heavy metal case. His name was Bill Morrison, and he was a forensic specialist from the Montana State Crime Lab. 26 years old, brilliant, and visibly frustrated by the lack of resources. Agent Dales, Morrison said, setting down his case. I was told to assist you. You were told correctly. Morrison opened his case. Inside were the tools of the trade in 1973, a graphite powder kit for fingerprints, a camel hair brush, a roll of Scotch tape, a Polaroid camera, plaster of Paris for casting footprints, and a small microscope. This is all I have, Morrison said. No spectrophotometer, no DNA, no computers. We do this the old way. The old way works, Dales said. Morrison got to work. First, he dusted the door frame for prints. He found several partials, smudged but usable. He lifted them with tape and pressed them onto white cards. Then he moved to the floor. He found footprints in the dried blood. They were large, far larger than any man's boot. Morrison mixed the plaster and poured it into the clearest print. These will take an hour to set, he said. While they waited, Dales walked through the rest of the house. The kitchen was clean. The bathroom was clean. The bedroom was a mess, drawers pulled open, clothes scattered. Was anything taken? No, Running Bear said. Wallet, phone, keys, all left behind. So not a robbery? No. They returned to the living room. Morrison was examining the blood spatter with a magnifying glass. Agent Dales, look at this. Dales knelt beside him. Morrison pointed to the pattern on the wall. This isn't spatter from a knife or a gun. This is from blunt force trauma, repeated massive impacts, but there's something else. He moved the magnifying glass to the floor. See these marks? They're not claw marks, they're fingerprints. He was grabbed, squeezed. Morrison looked up. His face was pale. Whoever or whatever did this, it had hands, and it was strong enough to crush bone. Part 3, The Autopsy. Helena State Morgue, October 19, 1973. The coroner's name was Dr. Harvey Finch. He was 62 years old with liver spots on his hands and a cigarette hanging from his lips. He had been doing this job since before Dales joined the bureau. He had seen everything, but not this. Come in, Agent Dales, Finch said, gesturing to the steel table. Take a look. The body of Joseph Little Bear lay under a white sheet. Finch pulled the sheet back to the chest. The ribs aren't broken, Dales. They're dislocated, torn from the sternum. I've seen car crash victims with less trauma. Finch moved to the arms. Both humeri fractured, not by a blow, by pulling. Someone grabbed his arms and pulled until the bones snapped. Dales stared at the body. What about the bite marks? Finch nodded. He pulled the sheet down to the victim's shoulder. A semicircle of deep punctures marked the flesh. Not a wolf, Finch said. Not a bear. The teeth are too flat, too broad, and see the spacing. Whatever bit him had a wider jaw than any animal I've ever seen. Finch lit a new cigarette from the butt of the old one. I've been doing this for 40 years, Dales. I don't believe in monsters. But I also don't believe in lying to myself. This isn't a man, and it isn't an animal. It's something in between. Dales looked at the bite marks, then at the dislocated ribs, then at the hands, the fingers that had been crushed, the nails that had been torn. What do I tell the families? He asked. Finch took a long drag. Tell them the truth, that you don't know. That's more than I can give you. Part 4, The First Action, The Forest. October 20, 1973, 9:47 p.m. The call came in at sunset. A hunter named Robert Hayes had not returned from the hills. His truck was still parked at the trailhead. Dales and 2 tribal police officers, Ben Little Wolf and Sam Killsback, drove to the trailhead. The forest was dark, the pines so thick that the moonlight barely reached the ground. They took flashlights and rifles. Dales carried his .357 Magnum. The trail wound upward for 2 miles. Dales's boots slipped on the loose gravel. The wind carried the smell of damp earth and rotting leaves. And then a sound. A low, wet breathing coming from behind a thicket of bushes. Dales held up his hand. The officers stopped. Hayes, Dales called out. No answer, just the breathing. Ben Little Wolf moved toward the thicket, his rifle raised. He pushed the branches aside. "Oh, God," he whispered. Dales ran to him. Robert Hayes was alive, but barely. He was curled in a fetal position, his clothes torn, his face covered in scratches. His eyes were wide, unfocused. His lips moved, but no sound came out. "Get him out of here," Dales said. Sam Killsback knelt beside Hayes. He tried to lift him, and then the trees moved, not from the wind. Something large pushed through them. Dales raised his flashlight. The beam caught it for only a second. It was tall, over 7 feet. Gray skin, mottled like old stone. Its arms were too long, hanging past its knees. Its face was smooth, almost featureless, except for 2 eyes that glowed red in the darkness. It had no mouth, but Dales heard it breathing. Ben Little Wolf fired his rifle. The bullet struck the creature in the chest. It staggered but did not fall. It did not bleed. It simply turned its head toward the officer, and then it moved. Faster than anything that size should move. It hit Ben Little Wolf like a truck. The officer flew backward, his rifle clattering to the ground. He landed 10 feet away, his arm bent at a wrong angle. He screamed. Dales fired his .357, 3 shots, center mass. The creature flinched but kept coming. Sam Killsback dragged Hayes toward the trail. Dales fired again. The creature raised one long arm and swatted the gun from his hand. Dales fell. His head hit a rock, his vision blurred. The creature stood over him, those red eyes, that breathing. And then, for no reason Dales could understand, it turned and vanished into the trees. Silence. Dales lay on the ground, gasping. His ears rang. His head throbbed. Ben Little Wolf was unconscious. Robert Hayes was catatonic. Sam Killsback was praying in Blackfoot. They got out of the forest at 2:00 a.m. Ben Little Wolf's arm would heal, but the scratches on his chest, the ones from the creature's hands, would never quite close. They would seep. They would scar. And they would itch forever. Part 5, The Pattern. Tribal Police Department, October 21-23, 1973. Dale spent 3 days going through records. Every disappearance, every unusual death, every animal attack in the last 18 months. He found 12 cases, and he found a connection. All 12 victims had visited the eyes clinic in Browning. All 12 had been treated by the same doctor, Dr. Elias Blackwood. Dales pulled Blackwood's file. It was thin, too thin. His credentials were impeccable: University of Heidelberg, residency in Vienna, 2 years at Cook County Hospital in Chicago. But before that, nothing. No birth certificate, no school records, no draft card. Dales made a call to the FBI's Foreign Liaison Office. "What do you have on Elias Blackwood?" The answer came 2 hours later. Blackwood isn't his real name. He was born Elias Schwarz in East Berlin, 1921. He worked for the Soviet program Lazarus in the 1950s. The program was officially closed in 1959. Schwarz disappeared. He resurfaced in the United States in 1965 under the name Blackwood. What was Project Lazarus? A pause. Officially, cell regeneration research. Unofficially, they were trying to bring the dead back to life, and according to our sources, they succeeded. But the subjects didn't stay human. Dales hung up. He stared at the wall. Part 6. The hospital's second action. Eyes Clinic, Browning, October 24, 1973, 2:33 a.m. Ben Little Wolf was recovering in the Eyes Clinic. His arm was in a cast. The scratches on his chest were bandaged, but he wasn't healing. Dales sat in a plastic chair beside the bed. He hadn't slept in 2 days. The door opened. Dr. Blackwood walked in. "Agent Dales," Blackwood said. His voice was soft, almost kind. "You should rest." "I'll rest when this is over." Blackwood nodded. He moved to the bedside and placed his hands on Ben Little Wolf's chest. Dales watched. At first, nothing happened. Then the bandages darkened. The scratches were bleeding, but instead of spreading, the blood seemed to be pulling back into the wounds. Blackwood's hands began to glow, faintly, blue-white like a fluorescent light. Dales stood up. His hand moved to his gun. Blackwood turned. His eyes caught the light, and for a moment they were red. "What are you?" Dales whispered. Blackwood smiled. It was not a kind smile. "I am what I made myself," he said, "and I am what I cannot undo." Dales drew his gun. Blackwood stepped back. His body rippled, and then he was gone, not through the door, not through the window. He simply dissolved into the air, leaving behind the smell of ozone and rotting flowers. Ben Little Wolf opened his eyes. He looked at Dales. "What happened?" Dales holstered his gun. "I don't know," he said. "But you're going to be okay." He wasn't sure if that was true. Part 7. The Forensic Breakthrough. Montana State Crime Lab, Helena, October 26, 1973. Bill Morrison had been working for 3 days. His desk was covered in photographs, plaster casts, and microscope slides. Dales stood in the doorway. "Tell me you found something." Morrison looked up. His eyes were red-rimmed, but there was something else in them: excitement. "I found everything," he said. He led Dales to the microscope. "Look at the hair samples. They're not human, not bear, not wolf. The medulla pattern is unlike anything in our reference collection." He moved to the plaster casts. "The footprints are 17 inches long. That's a size 30 shoe. No human has feet that size, but look at the toe impressions. They're prehensile, like a primate, something that can grip." He held up a photograph of the bite marks. "I sent the dental impressions to a zoologist at the University of Montana. He called me back last night. He said, and I quote, 'This is not from any known animal, extant or extinct. The dentition is omnivorous, but the jaw structure is built for crushing. It's like nothing on record.'" Morrison sat down. He looked exhausted. "Agent Dales, I've been doing this job for 3 years. I've seen murders. I've seen accidents. I've seen things that made me sick, but I've never seen anything that didn't fit any category." He paused until now. Dales looked at the evidence. The hair, the footprints, the bite marks, the blood that wasn't quite blood. "File it," he said, "under X." Part 8, The Ambush, Third Action. Abandoned Sawmill, Black Hills, October 28, 1973, 11:17 p.m. Dales had a plan. He borrowed explosives from an old contact in the Army Reserve, 4 sticks of dynamite and a remote detonator. He placed them around the abandoned sawmill at the edge of the hills. The bait was a goat tied to a post in the center of the mill. Dales waited in the shadows. His .357 was fully loaded. His hands were steady. At 11:30 p.m. they came, 2 of them. They moved through the trees like smoke, silent, fluid, wrong. Their red eyes glowed in the darkness. Their long arms swung at their sides. The goat bleated. The creatures stopped at the edge of the sawmill. They looked at the goat. They looked at each other, and then they stepped inside. Dales waited until they were both in the center of the mill. Then he pressed the detonator. The explosion was deafening. Wood and metal flew through the air. The goat was thrown clear, stunned but alive. One of the creatures was caught in the blast. It screamed, a sound like a broken pipe, like a dying engine, like nothing Dales had ever heard. It fell, it twitched, black ichor pooled beneath it, but the second creature turned. Its red eyes found Dales. It charged. Dales fired. 4 shots. Center mass. The creature didn't stop. It hit him like a freight train, slamming him into a pile of rubble. Dales's vision went white. He felt ribs crack. He felt the thing's hands around his throat, cold, dry, impossibly strong. He reached for his belt. His fingers found the handle of a hatchet. He swung. The blade sank into the creature's chest. It froze. Those red eyes widened not in pain but in surprise. Then it collapsed. Dales lay beneath it, gasping. The weight was crushing. He pushed. The creature rolled off him. He stood. His legs shook. His chest burned. He looked at the 2 bodies. One was dissolving, turning into black, tar-like liquid that seeped into the ground. The other, the one with the hatchet, was changing. Its skin became paler, its arms shortened, its face became human. Dales knelt beside it. The face of Dr. Elias Blackwood stared up at him. The eyes were closed, the chest did not rise, but when Dales touched the skin, it was warm. And then it began to dissolve too. Dales stood. He walked away from the sawmill. He did not look back. Part 9, The Interrogation, What Remains. FBI Field Office, Helena, October 30, 1973. Dales sat across from Dr. Irina Volkov, the woman who had worked with Elias Schwarz on Project Lazarus. She was old now, white-haired, frail, her hands trembling, but her eyes were sharp. "You saw them," she said. "The creatures." "I saw them." Volkov nodded. "Then you know what he did. Schwarz, Blackwood, he found the formula. Cellular regeneration beyond death. But the price." She looked down at her hands. "The price is that you stop being human. You become something else. Something that exists between life and death. Something that must feed on the living to stay coherent." "Can they be killed?" Volkov shook her head. "They cannot be killed, they can only be dispersed. The hatchet, the dynamite, it scatters them. But they will reform. They always reform. And they will always be hungry." Dale sat back. "How many are there?" Volkov looked at him. Her eyes were wet. "Enough," she said, "and more every year. Blackwood was not the only one who found the formula. He was just the one who tried to stop it." "He tried to stop it." "He came to America to find a cure. But the creatures, his first children, they followed him. He could not control them. He could only feed them. delay them. Volkov reached across the table. She took Dales's hand. You cannot win, Agent Dales. You can only survive. And you can only hope that the next generation, the agents who come after you, will be smarter, braver, better armed. She let go. That is the only hope any of us have. Epilogue: The Open File. J. Edgar Hoover Building, Washington, D.C. November 15, 1973. Dales filed his report. He left out the red eyes. He left out the dissolving bodies. He left out the hatchet and the dynamite and the thing that had smiled at him in the forest. He wrote, "Unidentified animal attacks. No suspects. Case remains open." Kirsch read the report. He looked at Dales. "This is bullshit, Dales." "Yes, sir. But it's going into the X-Files anyway, because I don't have a better place to put it." Dales nodded. He walked out of the office. He went home. He poured himself a drink. He sat in the dark and he listened. For a long time there was nothing, just the sound of the city, the hum of the refrigerator, his own breathing. And then so faint he almost missed it, a sound like breathing, deep, slow, coming from somewhere just outside his window. Dales did not turn on the light. He did not reach for his gun. He simply closed his eyes and said, "I know you're there. I know you're hungry. But not tonight." The breathing stopped. Dales opened his eyes. The window was dark. The room was empty. But he knew with a certainty that had no evidence, no logic, no place in any report that the thing had heard him, and that it would be back. They always came back. The end. Or, more accurately, to be continued.